Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. Today's date is April 28, 2021, and I'm going to do the last current events video for a while before we get back to a string of audiobooks. This video is about the Democratic Party, least favorite subject, or one of them, but it's got to be discussed, particularly Kyrsten Cinema, Joe Manchin, and how far is anybody really going to get working within this party? Because honestly, they have Joe Manchin and Kirsten Cinema, but they've probably got 5,000 more people ready to take their place if they ever lost them. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe, and consider supporting us on Patreon. There's a link to Patreon in the video description. Okay, so I'm going to start this video off. We're going to look at a number of different things with an article from the Daily Poster titled Manchin Mocks Sanders' $15 an hour wage bill at restaurant lobbyist event. This is, I don't have a date on here. It's from like last week, basically, sometime in the April 20s, recent. So subtitle is Conservative Dems Joe Manchin and Kirsten Cinema win plaudits at a closed-door event with restaurant lobbyists after voting to block a $15 minimum wage. It's by Joel Warner and Andrew Perez. When Joe Manchin told attendees at the National Restaurant Association, NRA's, national conference on Tuesday that the minimum wage shouldn't be more than $11, and there should still be a sub-minimum wage for tipped workers, the group's chief lobbyist couldn't contain his excitement. "From your lips to God's ears," exclaimed Sean Kennedy, the NRA's executive vice president of public affairs, who spoke with the Democratic senator from West Virginia as part of a virtual panel titled Seeking Unity, Conversations on Finding Bipartisan Solutions. A quick comment, when they say bipartisan, that's not, capital and labor, that is Democrats and Republicans, so capital and capital. You and I are not part of those bipartisan solutions. Don't ever think for a second that you are. The NRA is a powerful, sprawling lobbying operation with $289 million in revenue in 2018 and state affiliates around the country. The organization has been leading the charge to block a federal $15 minimum wage and is also fighting a separate Democratic effort to make it easier for workers to form unions. Another side note, I have worked for a couple of years in the restaurant industry, well, more than a couple of years, but it is one of the most underregulated business industries as far as labor laws. I think they have like the most exceptions of any industry from labor laws, whether it's, the number of breaks that employees are entitled to or whatever. It is, I think, just a throwback in many ways, the entire restaurant industry, to more like a servant economy. Terrible, terrible industry, full of working hazards, substance abuse being a major, major problem. Anyway, continuing, Manchin, along with Arizona Senator Kyrsten Cinema, were added to the NRA conference lineup after they joined 6 other Democrats in blocking an attempt by Senator Bernie Sanders to add a $15 minimum wage provision to the Democrats' COVID-19 relief legislation in March. Both lawmakers have also spoken out against efforts to reform the filibuster, a stand that will keep a lid on many key Democratic legislative priorities. And they have recently enjoyed cash infusions from business interests that would be affected by the party's proposals. Manchin and Cinema's statements at the conference, reportedly attended by several hundred restaurant operators from around the country, pull back the curtain on what they say to corporate interests when they're out of the public eye. The NRA event, billed as off the record and closed to press, was the association's annual public affairs conference, which means it was designed for lobbyists and focused on shaping legislation. During Cinema's talk, Kennedy praised the senator as a, quote, true moderate. She responded, quote, "My approach has always remained the same. I promised Arizonans that I would do things differently than some in Washington." What does that even mean? "And that I would be an independent voice for our state, not for any political party." Cinema says that she believes that, quote, "achieving lasting results on the issues that matter to everyday Americans really requires bipartisan solutions." And she called on her colleagues on both sides of the aisle to join me in my approach. Comment, Medicare for All enjoys 70% support. No one, very, very, very few politicians support it, even fewer in any kind of credible way. This is not about this at all. It's about serving capitalists, period. Continuing, in truth, however, Sinema's political approach and viewpoint on the minimum wage have shifted considerably since she first got into politics. She was at one time considered a progressive. Comment, we're going to do background on Kirsten Cinema. It's kind of fascinating, actually, towards the end of this video. During his talk, Manchin specifically took aim at Sanders for continuing to push for a $15 an hour minimum wage. Quote, we've been having meetings on minimum wage, and I can't for the life of me understand why they won't take a win on $11, he said. Comment, maybe because it's just not meaningful. It's just not enough. And we're in 2021. People, the vast majority of people live paycheck to paycheck and can't withstand a $500 to $1,000 emergency. That's why. $11 an hour is not going to substantially change that. If minimum wage had followed the curve that it was on originally, it would be over $20 an hour right now. 15 even is too small, but it's the first thing that could even be considered remotely, vaguely, proportional to people's needs. And if this economy can't deliver it, this economy needs a complete overhaul so that it can. Because this economy is serving a very few people very well and most people very badly. Continuing. Bernie Sanders is totally committed in his heart and soul that 15 is the way to go. Well, it might be the way to go, Bernie, but it ain't gonna go. You don't have the votes for it. It's not going to happen. So they're going to walk away with their pride saying we fought for 15, got nothing. Comment. Why does the Democratic Party, who, Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden say they're all for $15 an hour, why can they not rein in 2 fucking senators? Why can they not do that? Well, they can. They choose not to because they're paid to lose. Continuing. Manchin said there are other Democrats who agree with him that, quote, the path they're going down is wrong. Okay, says you. He added that he doesn't think the minimum wage should be increased to more than $11, and he said there should still be a lower sub-minimum wage for workers who rely on tips. Be the tipped wage. Quote, if it comes down to one person, I don't believe that it should be above $11. I don't think the tipped wage should ever go above half of that, Manchin said. Okay, let me just comment again and explain something. You work as a waiter or waitress, you are busting your ass so hard. It is a grueling life. Grueling. You work lunches, you're not going to make much money. In fact, in general, can you make money on the weekends? Yeah, you can. But what do $20 an hour? Like, it depends where you are. If you're at a nice restaurant, you can make, $20, $30 an hour, which is again, like, you're not living extravagantly. That's just somewhat comfortable working class life, somewhat comfortable. And then the job itself, you're on your feet all day. It's horrendous. People are rude to you. It's very low prestige, et cetera, et cetera. You're working crazy hours a lot of the time. And you have a bad shift, you make $40 or $30 or whatever. Anyway, this whole tipped wage is nonsense. You're just relying on customers to like subsidize your crappy pay. Continuing, the federal minimum wage is currently $7.25 an hour, and the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers is $2.13 an hour. West Virginia has an $8.75 minimum wage with a $2.62 tipped wage, $2.62 an hour. In response, Kennedy gushed to Manchin, quote, you and your staff have been absolutely amazing in working with small businesses, including the National Restaurant Association, in finding a common sense path, so we can wrap up that aspect by just saying thank you. Well, there you have it. Kennedy, who previously served in the Obama White House as a special assistant to the president for legislative affairs, interesting, has become the public face of corporate opposition to a $15 minimum wage. Very progressive White House he's coming out of there. Quote, the Raise the Wage Act imposes an impossible challenge for the restaurant industry, Kennedy noted in a statement earlier this year. A nationwide increase in the minimum wage will create insurmountable costs for many operators in states. Again, the restaurant industry is one of the sleaziest, most underregulated industries there are. It attracts some absolute scum as far as restaurateurs, these business owners. are some of the least honorable people I have ever worked with, ever. Ever. And the idea that we should structure the economy to fuck over workers and bend over backwards for this scum is just unsupportable. Continuing. Kennedy's talking points contrast with statements made by executives from several of the NRA's biggest member restaurants, including Denny's, Domino's, and the Cheesecake Factory, who have indicated to investors that increasing the minimum wage wouldn't be an overwhelming burden. In January, for example, McDonald's CEO Chris Kempczinski, hope I pronounced that right, told investors, "Our view is the minimum wage is most likely going to be increasing, whether that's federally or at the state level, as I referenced, and so long as it's done in a staged way and in a way that is equitable for everybody." What do you mean in a way that's equitable for everybody? Just fucking raise it. It's for the workers. It's bizarre phrasing. McDonald's will do just fine through that, you think? During his talk on Tuesday, Manchin reiterated his opposition to eliminating the legislative filibuster, which currently allows Republicans to block most legislation, and they overwhelmingly do, outside of spending bills unless Democrats can find 60 votes. The Senate is currently split 50-50, and Democrats only have a 51-vote majority with Vice President Kamala Harris able to break ties. Quote, "You get rid of the filibuster, and we will not be the country we are for this one reason. You'll have the violent swings, extreme swings, every time there's an election, whichever party is in power," he said. This is Manchin. This is Manchin saying this. "We're going to have violent swings." Let me tell you something, Joe Manchin. I don't want this to be the country we are. Lots of people don't want this to be the country we are, where 2/3 of working people can't afford a $500 emergency and live in a constant state of unease because they live paycheck to paycheck. I don't want to be that country. That's the whole point. It'll be no different than a lot of European countries are. What the fuck? Europe is more advanced than the United States. Why would you not want that? No different than a lot of developing countries. It's whoever's in power, and basically it swings. Yeah, it's called a democracy. Everything's thrown out and started over. No, that's not how it works. Maybe get out of West Virginia sometime. We have been a country, and we have grown as a country with a consistency that people could depend on. No, Joe, capitalists could depend on it. No working person can depend on this country. This country abuses us. That's the only thing we can depend on, is that the government is going to fuck you over for some capitalist somewhere. Labor activists were thrilled when Manchin on Monday said he would co-sponsor Democrats' landmark labor reform legislation, the Protecting the Right to Organize, or PRO Act, meaning there are now only 3 Democrats who have not signed on to the bill. Sinema is one of the holdouts. And commenting, we're going to cover the PRO Act or PRO Act soon. I do want to get some audiobooks out of the way first. This is a key piece of legislation that kind of came out of nowhere. All right. But Manchin's position on the filibuster makes it unlikely that the PRO Act will advance at all, as there's basically no chance that 10 Republicans will support the legislation. While Sinema didn't speak about the filibuster specifically, she said, quote, "What I'm telling my colleagues is that we cannot accept a new standard by which important legislation only passes on party line votes." Comment. It's like the way it's actually supposed to work. Anyway, if we were to accept that, it would set the stage for permanent partisan dysfunction. This is not a serious person. It would deepen the divisions that exist within our country. That's not possible. And it would further erode Americans' confidence in their government. Also not possible. Congress's approval rating is below 20%. Last I checked. Not possible, which we know is a challenge we face already. When Kennedy asked Sinema what restaurant operators should know about communicating with lawmakers, she replied that, quote, "Senators need to hear from their constituents. They may have a public position on an issue, but it's also that person's job to represent his or her constituents." A March poll of Sinema's constituents found that 52% of independents in Arizona and 72% of Democrats support raising the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour. This is like Medicare for all. 70% popularity, they pretend it isn't. Because that's not the people they count. They don't believe in democracy, fundamentally. Arizona's minimum wage is currently $12.15 with a tipped wage of $9.15. The same poll found that only 50% of Democrats viewed her favorably, down from 65% in January. The change came after Sinema attracted national attention for the overly performative way she flashed a thumbs down on the Senate floor to spike the $15 minimum wage provision that would have boosted the paychecks of 839,000 workers in her state. Let's show the video. Yeah, that's never going to come back to haunt you. Good choice. During the NRA conference, Sinema, who recently posted a photo of herself on Instagram wearing a ring that read, "Fuck off," said it's important to treat people with respect. As she advised lobbyists in attendance, you always want to be polite. And that is there on the screen. Incidentally, the company behind Kyrsten Cinema's fuck off ring is going to donate all proceeds to the fight for increasing the minimum wage. So that is good to know. Also, I did enjoy this take from Polar Johan. Kirsten Cinema is what you get when you splice a shitlib with a 40-year-old permanently cosplaying as an extra in a shitty mashup of Mean Girls and Clueless, produced by the edgy soccer mom division of Claire's. Truer words never spoken. So, who is Kirsten Cinema? I mean, we've known about Joe Haunted Manchin for quite a long time, but who is Kirsten Cinema? You know, what's her story, etc. So, I'm just going off of Wikipedia here. Even if 50% of this is true, it's a very unflattering story. So Kyrsten Cinema was born in July of 1976. She's 44 years old. She is from Arizona. Her family briefly lived in Florida while she was growing up. She began her political career in the Arizona Green Party in the early 2000s. She left the Green Party to join the Democrats in 2004, which is, I gotta say, a really weird time to join the Democratic Party. As far as, you know, anybody being committed to the Green Party in the early Bush years, thinking you're going to get ahead in the party that runs John Kerry and then loses to George W. Bush, in the second race in 2004. That's just, I consider that an interesting move, particularly given some of her background. So, like I said, born in 1976, reading from the bio here, when her stepfather lost his job after they moved to Florida and the bank foreclosed on their home, the family lived for 3 years in an abandoned gas station. Sinema has said that for 2 years they had no toilet or electricity while living there. She later recalled, quote, "My stepdad built a bunk bed for me and my sister. We separated our bunk bed from the kitchen with one of those big chalkboards on rollers. I knew that was weird. A chalkboard shouldn't be a wall. A kitchen should have running water." According to journalist Jonathan Martin in the New York Times, Sinema has given, quote, "contradictory answers about her early life, and Sinema's mother and stepfather had filed court documents saying they had made monthly payments for gas, electricity, and phone bills, even though Sinema said they had been without running water or electricity. When asked whether she had embellished details from her childhood, Sinema said, "I've shared what I remember. I know what I lived through." So she returned to Arizona in 1995. She worked as a social worker from 1995 to 2002 in the Phoenix area. She received a Master of Social Work, MSW degree from Arizona State University in 1999. In 2004, she earned a JD, that's a Juris Doctorate law degree from Arizona State University College of Law, and became a criminal defense lawyer. Why I said that all of this was so interesting. First of all, she possibly left the Green Party around this time because she was, getting serious, becoming a lawyer, whatever. But what struck my fancy here is that growing up with the background of poverty, whatever the actual degree of it was, and then also doing social work, having an MSW, in an MSW program, you get heavy, heavy training on the effects of poverty on people. I mean, you want to talk about like social justice warriors. MSWs are it. I mean, you don't go through a program like that unless you're really on board with studying the effects of poverty and, capitalism on society as a whole. You're working with families, you're working with kids, you're working with people of all ages, seniors who are marginalized, not having their needs met by society, their lives have been broken, whatever. And, social workers, by and large, are basically helping to restore some sense of order to people's lives and healing where society has, failed them. And what you quickly see working in social work is that capitalism is just, there are so many holes. It's less like Swiss cheese and more like an oversized fishing net with like more hole than rope. And unfortunately the holes here are big enough for people to fall right through. So coming from that background, it's, odd. Where does the about face come from? I mean, early 2000s, she is in social work. She's part of the Green Party. She's anti-war. She's 9/11 Truth. These are all things that I was actually at the exact same time. She then runs for the Arizona State House as a Green in 2002, finished last place out of 5. Then she joined the Democratic Party for the next cycle, 2004, and she won. Oh, well, I wonder if that is where she started selling out, was, joining the Democratic Party, trade your values in, and get some power in the bourgeois government, etc. She's then reelected several times. She then runs for the U.S. House, wins in 2012, and then becomes a senator. So now she has been in the machine for quite some time. But before we get into details on her political positions, which things get even more interesting there, here is a clip of her talking to the Arizona Chamber of Commerce about the PRO Act.
There is some concern right now in the business community, as you've probably heard, an issue that our friends at the Arizona chapter of the Associated General Contractors wanted me to bring up with you, that there's a bill that passed the House, the PRO Act. Give us a sense, as this bill makes its way to the Senate, where you intend to be on this. We know it's an evolving issue, and if you'd be willing to have a discussion with employers in Arizona about our concerns about this bill being a disruption to the workplace and to our business environment.
Well, I would welcome such a discussion. As folks who are listening today know, the way I make decisions on behalf of Arizona and for our constituents is by listening to the business leaders who will be impacted by these decisions. So I want to discuss this legislation, and I want to know the impact it would have on Arizona jobs and the economy. Now, there hasn't been any movement on the PRO Act yet in the United States Senate, but I can tell you that many Arizona businesses have already reached out to my office, and I know have discussed the concerns that they have with the PRO Act with some of the folks who are on our call today. Now, right now, this legislation is not scheduled to come before the full Senate, but we are watching carefully because some of the PRO Act provisions, especially in regards to the worker classification test for independent contractors, could become a part of other legislative ideas. So I would ask all the members who are joining us today to please stay involved with my office and help me by sharing information about how this would impact you and your company so that I can go back to Senate leadership and folks on both sides of the aisle to discuss the concerns that Arizona businesses have.
And here's your Democrats. This is all they want to do, talk about how it's going to impact businesses. Meanwhile, in this case, one of the things that the PRO Act would do is it would help to address, and I go into the particulars later, actually, after I find them all, but my understanding is it helps to address the misclassification of employees as independent contractors. I can tell you from my work in the labor movement that this is one of the most common labor abuses by employers, is taking an employee who is an employee, meets the legal definitions of an employee, does not meet the legal definitions of an independent contractor, and hires them as an independent contractor. What this means is that they don't have to pay benefits, and it just changes the employee situation. The employee has to withhold their own taxes, all kinds of stuff. This is, like I said, one of the most common pieces of like labor fraud that there is by employers. And this bill, my understanding is it would help to address that, make it clearer, and just reduce that abuse, which is a burden on workers. And it's like they just don't want to hear it. Here's the deal. For us as workers, no one is speaking for us. We need an independent left Labor Party. All right, now let's get back to Kyrsten Cinema's political positions with that as an introduction straight from the horse's mouth. Okay, so when she was running for U.S. Senate, she refused to debate her competitor in the Democratic primary, Deidre Aboud, an attorney and community activist, presumably running to Sinema's left. I just find this interesting because refusing to debate your political opponents is fundamentally anti-democratic, I believe. When she was in the House, she was a member of the Blue Dog Coalition. These are conservative Democrats. As if being a Democrat, itself wasn't conservative enough. She had to declare herself part of the, conservative bloc within the party. Few other issues worth highlighting: capital punishment. So while working as a spokesperson for the Arizona Green Party, Sinema worked to repeal the death penalty. In her 2009 book, Unite and Conquer, she explained her stance on capital punishment, writing that she opposed it, quote, because I think no civilized society should use it as a punishment, unquote, although, quote, since we have the death penalty in Arizona, I want to ensure that it's being implemented as fairly and judiciously as possible. Okay. Anyway, in 2007, she did introduce legislation to the Arizona state legislature, which would require the Arizona Supreme Court to strike any prior death sentence and enter in its place a sentence of life without parole. However, then later in 2017, Sinema and 47 other House Democrats voted with the majority of House Republicans on H.R. 115, or the Thin Blue Line Act of 2017, which was opposed by the ACLU. The bill would, quote, expand the list of statutory aggravating factors in death penalty determinations to include the killing or targeting of a law enforcement officer, first responder, or firefighter. So she stands for nothing. That's a very mixed record, both trying to contract and expand the death penalty. Economics and taxes. She has voted for federal stimulus spending. However, she also was one of just 7 House Democrats to vote in favor of a Republican-backed bill to repeal the estate tax. This is what Republicans and libertarians call the death tax. It would affect 0.2% of Americans each year, estates of 5.43 million or more for individuals, or 10.86 million or more for couples. Also, in September 2018, she voted, quote, to make individual tax cuts passed by the GOP in 2017 permanent. She was one of just 3 Democrats to break with her party and vote for the tax cuts being made permanent. So again, very mixed record and some very kind of far-right things voting for that there. On the environment, this is from a former Green. Keep that in mind. In 2019, Sinema was one of 3 Democrats. This seems to be like a common thread of like she'll be, one of the only 10 Democrats to vote with Republicans on some very not so good legislation. One of 3 Democrats to join all Republicans in voting against the Green New Deal, a stimulus program that aims to address climate change and income inequality, while most other Democrats voted present. That was not good enough for her. In April 2019, Sinema was one of 3 Democrats who voted with Republicans to confirm David Bernhardt, a former oil executive, as Secretary of the Interior. She also, I didn't include a screenshot, but voted to confirm Barr as AG. Moving on to foreign policy, Sinema supports the use of military force to stop genocide, such as in Sudan, Somalia, and Rwanda. She wrote a doctoral dissertation on the 1994 Rwandan genocide, published in 2015. She was opposed to the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and helped organize anti-war protests while a law student at Arizona State. She was involved in various things relating to that. However, after joining Congress in 2012, she said her views on military force had, quote, evolved, of course, and that, quote, you should never take military intervention off the table. When you do so, you give an out to a rogue nation or rogue actors, unquote. Josh Laderman of The Hill also reported that, quote, she said she favors aggressive diplomacy, crippling sanctions to combat proliferation, and swift multilateral intervention as a last resort, unquote. Since joining Congress, she has voted against the Iran nuclear deal and supported Trump's missile attack on Syria. So much for being anti-war. You stand for absolutely fucking nothing. So here is, a brief glimpse into the world, the cursed, twisted world of Kirsten Cinema, one of the younger Democrats. I don't know. This party is trash. And probably the next thing we're going to cover is the PRO Act. It's so depressing covering Democratic Party stuff, honestly. At least I was able to keep the yelling to a minimum in this one. But, this is what happens. People start out progressive. They get involved with the Democratic Party. The next thing they are, espousing Lockheed Martin talking points. So there you have it. Leave a comment. Thanks for watching. I'm wiped. I'm so tired of reporting on this crap. Anyway, but, get out of the Democratic Party. It's just an onslaught of bad news, pretty much always. Thanks for watching. Thanks to our current patrons whose names are on the screen. If you'd like to get your name on the screen, head to patreon.com/socialismforall. If that is not for you, you can help out by liking, subscribing, and especially sharing this video. If you are on Facebook, go ahead and join some socialist groups. There are some great ones that have like thousands of members. And share a couple of S4A videos in there. It really drives traffic and gets the subs up. We're trying to expand this audience, expand the conversation for ending capitalism and instituting socialism. It's a great place to find people. Unfortunately, I'm off of Facebook now permanently, or fortunately. Anyway, thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next video.